Okay, welcome to another iPad painting tutorial. I've done a few tree paintings over the last few weeks, so I thought I'd do something a little bit different. We're just a few days away from Christmas Day now, so I thought it'd be appropriate to do a Christmas wreath. I'm going to make it out of a few natural components, so some obviously pine needles, some berries and some holly, as well as some lights in there as well. So I've opened a square canvas, so it's 2048 by 2048 pixels. It is one of the default canvases on Procreate anyway. In terms of the colours, if you just go to the colour circle at the top, just clear those. These are the pre-selected colours that I'm going to be using. If you want to use these exact colours, they may look a little bit different on camera, but if you want to make sure that you are using the same colours that I've used, there is a link down in the video description. There's also the colour codes there. So the link takes you to my Patreon page and you can download the colour file there for free. Or you, like I say, can take a note of the colour hexadecimal codes. So you go to the value section within Procreate and you can type them in here one at a time, press enter, the colour appears up here, and then you can start piecing it together yourself. You'll also find links to my Facebook group and my Instagram, where if you have a go at this tutorial or any of my tutorials and want to tag me or share them in the group, then there are links down in the description for those things too. In terms of the brushes, I'm going to be using the Tinderbox brush within inking. I've not changed the settings, it's completely on default, but I'm also going to be using the airbrush, soft brush and medium brush. Okay, so we've got our canvas. The first thing I'm going to do is change the background. So I'll go to the background, tap on it, and you can choose, you can have it completely black, or if you want to give it a hint of colour, perhaps you could just dial it back a little bit from the purest of blacks. I'm going to give it a hint, but barely a hint of this slight bluey purple. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to start making some components. So I'm going to go to my medium brush, I'm going to go to my colours. I'm going to use the last colour on the top row, which is this brown. I'm going to put it down to about 2% size, the lower end of 2%, and about 70% opacity. And with that brush, I'm just going to mark out a couple of places where I want perhaps my pine needles, and I'm going to do a series of 4, and obviously with some kind of branch connecting them. But we're going to create another layer on top of that. Back to my colours, I'm going to go for the darkest green this time, and I'm going to switch brushes to the inking and the Tinderbox. I'm going to turn the size of the brush to about 20%. Then I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to start carefully adding the needles. Now this brush is pressure sensitive, so if you press on lightly you'll get a thinner part, and then you press on more and you get a thicker part, which is useful because we're going to start with thinner tips at the end of each of the needles. So we're going to start lightly at the top and then press a little bit more until it joins our branch. And then I'm going to do the same again, and it doesn't matter if some of them overlap, that's natural enough. And then you can start the other direction too. You can press on a bit more and then have it winding out, whichever suits you, alternate it perhaps. I don't mind if they overlap a little bit as well. Keep it a bit more naturalistic by having them overlapping. They're not all going to be completely uniformly laid out for us. And I'm going to do the same for the remaining branches. Keep them overlapping in places, keep it more natural. We don't want them completely too neat looking, unless that's what you're going for. Obviously, with art, it's a personal preference. I'm trying to keep it a little bit on the natural side, even though it is still predominantly quite stylized, let's face it. And then I'm just moving it around for my comfort, just spinning it around a little bit. You might find you get a little bit faster as you go along. Just be careful though, in case you press on too much, you're going to end up with larger sections that you don't necessarily want. Whereas actually, perhaps after a while you get into the motion of it and there's a speed that you can apply, and you can do it in really quite a fast motion once you get a bit more confident perhaps. So I'm just going to fill in some of these areas just to pad it out a little bit perhaps, like this. You still want to see bits of the branch in the middle there, but not too much, like that. Then on another layer, I'm going to go along to my colours. I'm going to use a slightly lighter green. So I've got a lighter version here, and if I show you next to it, it does appear quite a lot brighter. So I'm going to turn the opacity of that down from 100% down to about 30%. It's quite a lot lighter. And I'm going to go into the needles that I'm actually painted, and then on the ends of them, in fact I'm going to turn the brush size down on this because I want to be a bit more precise. So I'm turning the brush size down to about 10%, and again it's on that 30% opacity, and just pressing lightly on the ends here, I'm just going to increase the brightness on the very tips of the needles. You don't have to do it on every single one. If you do it on some of them, it's going to be really helpful, especially if they're in the front here and you want them to stand out compared to the ones that have gone behind it. So I hope you can see it adds just a bit more depth, a bit more variety to the needles that are there. So I'm going to do that now, but in all the other sections too. So the ends of the needles are where I'm going to focus most of my energy, but also on some of the needles that I want to jump forward on top and just look a little bit closer to us compared to the others. You don't want to spend too long on these because they're going to be duplicated and we're going to get an overlapping effect anyway. But spend a little bit of time, because if the details are right, then it's going to help the overall effect certainly. So I'm just going for the tips, and then maybe just some of them want to stand out on top. This isn't going to be photo real, but it creates a nice effect nevertheless. I do tend to go for something that looks more photographic for my tutorials and most of my other painting and drawing tutorials, but just occasionally it's quite nice to keep something a little bit more stylized. And certainly Christmas is known for being a little less about realism, isn't it? It's more about the magic and the effect. So it seems appropriate that we just loosen up the normal kind of rules that we would apply in my tutorials. Now, if you want to spend ages on this and, you know, really go for a super high definition, realistic version of this, then awesome, go for it. But this is not what we're showing you today. I'm just going to move along to a brighter colour. So I'm not going to change layer. I might as well keep it on layer 2. So I'm going to go to the third colour along. And just now on the very ends, I'm just going to further heighten it on the very, very ends of these pine needles. Again, not on every single one, just on enough to get the idea across. Maybe when you get a load here that overlap, it might be more important to do it in fact, just because it's getting a little bit clustered and you're losing some of them. I'm just aiming it right on the very end like we did before. I'm going to create another layer, and we're going to have a go at doing some holly this time. In fact, let's just disappear the previous layers so it's not going to be too much of a distraction. So again, pretty stylized, but let's go for it. With our medium brush again, we're going to have it still on the 2% size and the 70% opacity. Again, on this darkest green, we're just going to do a couple of shapes where the leaves are going to go. So I'll do one to begin with, and we're just creating those spikes, aren't we? Fairly recognizable shapes for holly, not too difficult to create. So spiking out, maybe getting a little bit fatter there and then coming back in. Try and keep it roughly symmetrical, but doesn't need to be exact. And maybe we'll do it again for a bit more variety. We can piece them around, so we're going to do the same again. So spiking out. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect this, as long as you get in the overall effect. Try and keep the spikes roughly the same number. If it goes a little bit wrong, doesn't matter, because even holly isn't completely perfect if you look at it in the natural environment. Join those together in this area, because what you can do is you can just drag from that area to fill those different gaps. Now sometimes, you know, it might be that it floods the area, so you just need to keep your pencil on the screen and drag it left and right, and it will flood fill to the point that you need it. And once you've done it once, then the next time you drag it, it's likely to just flood it in the way that you've just set it to. So it tends to remember that, which is great. So now I've done that, I'm going to go to my soft brush. I'm going to put it at, again, the 2% size, but really quite low on the opacity, so about 15%. Zoom in a little bit. I just want some of this lighter green, so we're on the second green now. I want some of this lighter green, adding a bit more variety of tone. I'm avoiding that center area. I want to keep it a little bit darker there, obviously, and I'm just focusing it near the ends too. I can even go in with the third lightest color, and I can just start adding a little bit more of that on the very ends too, like so. And I'm going to do the same for all of them. So go back to that second color, repeat the process, just add a bit more of this on the end, down the center a little bit, avoiding that middle strip, back to the third color, and just a little bit more of that on the very end, just to ramp up the contrast. And it doesn't take a lot, it just creates a bit more 3D depth. So we're going to do the same on this one. Second color, still all of this on the 2% size and 15% opacity within the soft brush. So we've not changed those, we're just going to use that to now do all four. Back to the third color, a bit more of a highlight. And then same here. Then we're going to go to our red color. We're going to use the medium brush. We're going to put it up to about 4% size and 70% opacity. And we're just carefully going to add a couple of berries. Doesn't matter if they overlap a little bit. Maybe press on a couple of times for the one you want to bring out to the front. And do the same again. Maybe just a couple on that one. Back to our colors. Go for this brighter red. Turn it down a little bit. So we were on 4%. We're going to turn it down to the lower end of 3%, and we're going to turn this strength really lower down now to about 10%. So we're going to aim towards slightly the top part of that berry. So I'll zoom in, just the upper part of the berry now. It's not very precise, it doesn't matter though, because you're just going for the effect. So I'm just tapping it a couple of times in the upper part of the berries, just to create a slight sense of roundness. And we'll repeat that with this even brighter color now. So again, still everything on the medium brush. Turn it down to 2% and turn it even lower on the opacity to about 5%. Zoom in, tap a couple of times here, maybe do it a few more times, and do the same for these ones. So I'm going to just mute that layer, just get rid of that layer for now, put the other two layers back on, and I'm going to merge the first two layers, like that. So now all of the needles and stuff is on one layer, we've got that on a second layer, and at this point, I'm going to go to my medium brush, turn it really low, and it's just going to be a guide, this. So I'm going to add another layer. I'm going to put it at the bottom of everything and turn the opacity up so I can see it. So 20% will be plenty to see it. And I'm going to draw a big circle, close the circle and then hold it, and it asks you to edit the shape. So I'm going to edit it to a circle, and you can pull it. As long as it's not for one of the blue points, you can pull it and it will just maintain it as a circle. You can move it to where you want it to be. Put it in the center of your canvas. Then I'm going to go back to this detail. I'm going to go to my little arrow tool here, which is the transform. I'm going to place it somewhere on that circle where I feel that it kind of fits the curve. Distort it, rotate it, however it works best for you. Once I've done that, I'm going to go back to that layer and duplicate it. And then going to go back to the arrow and move this duplicated version to somewhere slightly different. You'll need to rotate it a bit, move it, maybe just angle it slightly different than the first one, vary it up a little bit, but you just need generally to have it conform to that shape. Deselect. I'm going to duplicate it one more time, and then I'm going to show you another way of saving even more time. This time I'm going to put it up here, so the little green part of it helps you rotate, and then we're going to line it up roughly with this top section somehow, like that. Then you can pinch all of those elements together, slide and duplicate it again, and now you've got an even bigger section to play with that you can just rotate and move along to another section of your wreath. So place it wherever you think, duplicate it again, or you could really have just duplicated, pinched them all together and duplicated that again, but I'm going to stay with just this element and keep doing that. Okay, so we have something like a wreath shape now. So once we've got that element, we can put our holly back on. Now looking at the holly, compared to the background, it looks a little bit too bright. So I'm going to adjust that. I'm going to go to my adjustments, use saturation and brightness, and just turn the brightness down until it looks about right. So about 45% actually works better. Gives it a bit more darkness and looks more natural. We can then go to our selection tool, go on freehand, select the one that we want to move, close that selection, go back to the transform tool. It then allows us to move this element independently of everything else. So we can move that, rotate it, put it in the mix wherever we feel would look good. We can repeat the process with the other one. So again, the selection tool on freehand, draw around it, select it, transform it, reduce the scale somewhere we think would be close enough, like this. We could then take this, because both of those are on the same layer, again, duplicate it, and again, transform it, rotate it, move it to somewhere new. Duplicate the layer again, let's do the same thing again, rotate it, put it somewhere new, duplicate it, rotate it, put it somewhere new. So let's add some more berries to this. I think that it would be made even more interesting with some berries and berry features in there. So we're on the dark red again, so go back to the brush, 3% size now is about right. So let's just go to areas now. Perhaps on this top layer, we think there needs to be a selection of berries. Anywhere where it just looks a bit plain, we can just add berries. And this is going to help create this slightly more random look. It's really quick to do. You will have to go back over these just to add the highlights, but it is a quick feature and it just increases the naturalistic look because these are easy to place in and obviously they've got to be a lot more random than everything else we've done so far. Let's really use this to our advantage. Once you're happy with that effect, we can go back in with the highlights. So the middle red, turn it down again. So what do we have it? I don't on 3%. So we need to go down to the lower end of 2%, reduce that opacity to about 30%. Think about where the light's coming from. It is a bit confused from the other berries, but let's just try and add a bit more uniformity now. So I'm going to imagine the light's coming from above just a little bit, although it doesn't really matter because let's face it, we rotated the holly and the other things. And so the light source is a little bit confused, so don't worry too much. It could be that they're reflecting light back off the little lights that we're going to add in a little bit later anyway, so don't worry about that. Just aim somewhere roughly in the centre, perhaps near the top. Always looks kind of natural. Go back in with the brightest of that pink red colour, turn the opacity down to about 10%. We're in that region anyway, it doesn't have to be precise, but we're going to turn that really quite low to about 1%. Go into those, just create a point of sheen, just to really sell the idea that they are round. Just spend a moment on these. Maybe you can have on some of them like double highlights. So you've got the main light source on one area and then just a little hint of something coming around from the back. Don't worry too much though. If we add any lights that are really close to any of the berries, maybe we could add a little bit of a sheen at that point to any of the features in fact. So just spend a minute going around all of the berries. Could even turn that opacity up a little bit to about 20%, just to speed this along. Everything we've done so far is almost setting and background for the real magic that comes in with those twinkly kind of lights. Okay, so let's create a new layer. So we're going to go to the first colour we've got here, which is this yellowy orange. If you go on the colour disc, you can see where that's placed. We're going to use the soft brush and we're going to put it at around 2% size and about 40% opacity. Let's just have a look. You can see it there. In fact, let's turn the opacity up a little bit more. I had to press that a bit hard. So I'll put it up to 60%. And just looking at the size, the top end of 2% I think would work well. And then we're just going to go around, select a few points, tap it a few times where we want the lights to come in. Perhaps space them out. We don't want them extremely clustered. We want them to work their magic, but not be too busy. And you can see I'm initially just placing them around, slightly more random. Okay, then I'm going to go to my adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur them in slightly to about the 6%. You'll still see them, but they are blurred in. Now, I'm going to go to my next colour along. I'm going to turn the size of it down to the 2% and keep it on the 60% opacity and just go for the middle points now of where we've done that. In fact, let's turn it down a little bit more. So really the top end of 1% works better, and we can just go for the center of those little glowing areas. Tap it a few times, and we're starting to go most of the way to creating that effect, but there's more that we can do. So we'll just go around and do that initially. So aim roughly for the center of those shapes. Spend just a minute going around, and once we've done that, then I'm going to duplicate that layer, go to the bottom version of it. I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur. I'm going to blur that in slightly as well to about 3%. I'm going to go back to the top layer. I'm going to go back to my adjustments. I'm going to go to the bloom setting this time. And then on the bloom, I'm going to turn it up all the way to 100%. And you can start to see now it's adding more of that magic. On the bottom layer underneath it, we're going to do the same again with that. So we're going to go to the adjustments, bloom, and turn the bloom up on that lower layer as well. So we're really starting to get the illumination effect, but we can definitely take it further. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to merge those two layers. So once I've merged them, I'm going to duplicate them, and I'm going to put the duplicated version at the bottom of everything. I'm going to go to my adjustment or transform tool, and we just need to zoom out a little bit so I can do this properly, and maybe rotate that a little bit. So we're now going to have a slightly more 3D effect of some coming from behind, and then some are going to be more on top, like that. Then I'm going to go back to my top layer, create another layer, go back to my colors, pick the white color this time, and any of the ones that I think really should stand out, I'm going to keep it on the 1% size, but put it up to the 100% opacity. And I'm just going to go for the center of the ones that I think should be really much more prominent, and just exaggerate those ones a little bit. So just one tap at 100% should do for some of them. You don't need to do it for every single one. It's probably better if you don't do it for every single one. Create a bit more variety. And some of the ones that are in the background now, obviously a layer underneath, are not going to get this white dot in the center. So once we're at that point, I mean, we're almost there, but let's see if we can push it even further. So on this layer now, we've got all the little white dots that we've added on top. We can take that layer, go back to the adjustments and the bloom, and then move it along, and you can see now it's just ramped them up that little bit extra. Now that we've done that, we could create another layer. We can go back to our yellow color, still on the, well, let's put it on the medium brush, put it at really low size, about 1% and about 20% opacity. And anywhere now that there's a bright white light source, you can just create some edges where perhaps it impacts on the edge of our leaves, for example. Now this is going to be something that really sells the illusion. So if you want to spend a bit of time doing that, then it might be worth your while. You don't want to do it everywhere, you just want to do it where perhaps there's a bright light, and you can just create lights on the edges of some of those shapes to the degree that you think it is going to be impacted. Now this is going to take you a little while, but do you know, I think that it's probably worth the time just to really start to bring it all together. So though it is still quite a stylized version, this is going to impact and make it more believable. So I'm just going to do that all around the piece now. So take anywhere where there's a bright light source right next to the edge of something like a holly leaf, for example, and just use it to define and pick out those edges a little bit more than they are currently. Now I've noticed I've not used that dark brown yet. I did actually put that in place because I thought if there was any berries that perhaps just looked a little bit strange and on their own, then you can just go in there and add some twigs to join them up, give them a sense of belonging somehow, connected. So I just turn the opacity up to maybe even 100%, small brush size or 1%, and just connect them in. If you feel it's necessary anyway, if they look a little bit out on a limb, now that you're starting to add a bit more realism with the lighting, just be careful though, then just occasionally you might feel it makes sense to add a little bit of a twig in there as well. I'm not too bothered, but it's there in case you want to do it. I'm more interested in the highlights. I think that adds more dynamism to the piece. Okay, I'm going to show you the finished version just in a moment, but I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. If you had a go and you enjoyed and you're pleased with your results, make sure to tag me on Instagram or share them in my Facebook group with me and the rest of the group. We'd love to see them. And other than that, have a fantastic holiday, Christmas, whatever you celebrate. Doesn't have to be Christmas, but I hope you have a great time over this part of the season anyway. Press the thumbs up, does the channel and the video a load of good. Hit the bell notification button, and I hope to see you back here again soon. See you later. Bye now.